Chapter 559. Everyone knew that the Emperor Kalusa had long suffered from a mysterious chronic illness. Ever since the carriage accident that occurred during the Crown Prince selection test, the Emperor had rarely left the Sun Palace, keeping a low profile as if he were sequestering himself away. Though on significant matters, he would express his opinions through written decrees and move his ministers to fulfill his intentions, there was all there was to it. Rumors circulated that the emperor's illness was a horrific skin disease or even a form of madness. However, no one knew the exact truth. Even Duke Paleta, who had returned to the capital and resumed his normal activities since the emperor's reclusion, kept silent on the matter. The house of Diarca, who had taken the crown prince's position, seemed endlessly at ease. The empress, who appeared in public events in place of the emperor, grew visibly more pale as the days passed. People inferred from these changes that the Emperor Kalusa's chronic illness was incurable. What was there to fear from a man who was, after all, soon to die? And what need was there to resist whatever he might do? The imperial family's authority had been waning for decades, making it difficult to contend with the four major ducal houses. Even Emperor Kalusa, who had earned high expectations since his days as a prince for his eloquent speech and sharp mind, found it difficult to overturn the power dynamics that had been suppressed since ancestral times. Needless to say, that was all the more true now that he had acquired a fatal illness. The imperial family was no longer the formidable entity it had been hundreds of years ago. Under the influence of dukes like Diarca, who aimed to empower the nobility further, the R system, originally a stable cooperation between the officials who followed the emperor and the territorial lords who had inherited lands generationally, gradually lost its strength. The stature of the ducal houses was evident in the titles they bore, no less significant than those of a crown prince. The imperial knights who should protect the imperial family were filled with individuals more concerned with their own families and interests. The numerous nobles who commanded vast lands took advantages of the chaos to ignore cooperation with officials and further their own goals. It was the first time in the Or's 1,000-year history that the nobles' power had been so great. After all, the current emperor will soon be gone. We must seize all the benefits we can before a new imperial family rises. Once established, such perceptions are not easily changed. Even if the emperor invested effort into establishing the cavalry, specialized in monster extermination, even if he commanded a stricter investigation into the activities of the Apeto and other ducal houses, even when he made an appearance at a palace party for the first time in years, few considered it a serious threat. This was the same even when the following news leaked out of the Sun Palace. A monster has appeared within the Sun Palace, attempting to harm the emperor. We will find and bring the justice to the perpetrator and those behind this crime. Such incidents used to be fairly common. Back when Emperor Kalusa was actively keeping the ducal houses in check, the Sun Palace and Dawn Palace had seen their fair share of various suspicious and dangerous events. But this time, they said a monster has appeared in the Sun Palace, and it had to happen right after the newly established cavalry celebrated resolving an abnormal monster occurrence in the western region. Of all the places, a monster had to appear in the Sun Palace. It was an attack rife with symbolism, evident to anyone who saw it. Remarkable, really. Duke Diarca is putting on quite a show, especially considering the end isn't far off. This is obviously a response to the humiliation they suffered at the party at the hands of the cavalry. Revealing this level of defiance as the emperor's end approaches is rather alarming. Obvious, maybe, but they'll just cut off the tail and be done with it. That's just how Diarca operates. Right on cue, whispers flowed from within the Sun Palace that the emperor's chronic illness had deteriorated further since the failed assassination attempt. People were certain they hadn't been wrong to fear Duke Diarca. Meanwhile, they expected the cavalry and Duke Paleta, who had relied solely on the emperor, to be more circumspect. Kishir, did you find the letter I sent entertaining? Emperor Kelusa lay half reclined on his bed, engaging with his brother, seemingly more relaxed than ever. I was genuinely surprised. I always thought you were never one for jokes, Your Majesty, but I have to admit this one got me. I suppose I was quite shocked myself when I first realized this power. A faint smile crossed the Emperor's face but vanished just as quickly. As I demonstrated through that letter, I can temporarily transfer my sight and hearing to any object I touch. Whoever receives the object becomes visible and audible to me, even as I sit still. The letter Kishir had received from the Emperor while he was with the cavalry seemed no different from previous correspondence, except for the peculiar line, "As soon as you receive this, speak out loud any question you wish to ask me. However, it should be a question only I can answer." Kishir realized that this was related to the Emperor's newfound abilities. The serious question he and Yudhir eventually settled on was, "May we send more dresses to Her Majesty the Empress?" And within an hour, a new letter arrived with the message, "No purple dresses. Also, give Baron Ale a break." The reply was eerily accurate, as if the Emperor had been watching all along. Did you discover this ability thanks to the Empress? Let's just say that's the case. As the Empress had left his side to return to her own palace, the Emperor found himself missing her as usual. But then something wholly different happened. Her voice and figure appeared before him, thanks to some mysterious power. The shock nearly had him tumbling out of the bed. The power didn't last long, but after several trials, the Emperor quickly realized just how formidable this newfound ability was. I still don't know how to maintain this power for an extended period, or how it could be further utilized, but in our current circumstances, it will surely be helpful. Indeed, especially for gauging the reactions of those who mistakenly believe Your Majesty's illness is too far more severe. I have already sent it out. Of course, you have to. In the brief moment their eyes met, familiar emotions swirled between the brothers. Though in varying degrees, both wore similarly chilling smiles. I have already discovered something interesting. I initially found the failed invasion odd, as it seemed inconsistent with Duke Diarca's usual tactics. But judging by the reactions, it appears it wasn't something he intended after all. So that was the case. Their eyes met once more. The space between them filled with the intricate fabric of emotions and secrets they had always shared. Intruders had entered the Sun Palace through a multitude of pathways. It was clear that information had leaked about the day, but it was also evident that they were unaware of the specifics of what would transpire here. Had they known, they wouldn't have ventured so recklessly, poking around and threatening. They would have opted for a far more reliable method. The same conclusion was reached based on the investigation by Nathan and members of the cavalry, Kishir continued. All of the ordinary people who came in through those routes were all filtered out at the Knight's lines. We believe that the Awakeners who managed to stay and breach our defenses are responsible for this incident. Have you identified these individuals? According to Kana, it appears that one of them had the ability to block information. Controlling both animals and humans, another Awakener seemed to be enhanced by a third party, making it difficult to trace back to their point of origin. It will take a bit more time to understand the individuals involved. Even with an Awakener who can read information, they are this elusive. They must have moved with extreme caution. They didn't even know that we would call in the cavalry. Emperor Kelusa stroked his chin, his eyes behind his glasses flickering with numerous speculations. Compared to before, which merely maintaining his physical form was draining, his gaze was incomparably clearer. But you seem to have some suspicions. It's hard to fool your sagacious eyes, Your Majesty. Kishir let out a wry smile. Technically, it was not me, but my assistant who has identified a prime suspect. As an Awakener group, that we have been tracking for unrelated reasons is currently by the Crown Prince's side. While we don't know their objective yet, there is a high probability that they lent temporary aid for this occasion. The Duke of Diarca had been in contact with a significant number of Awakeners before the incident. Given that they had been expanding their forces and contracting mercenaries, one of them being responsible seemed highly likely. However, Udir pointed out different individuals. Kishir's invaluable assistant, who was now likely resting semi-forcibly within the cavalry, had pinpointed the most suspicious people based on his personal investigations conducted over time within the unit. If we are to find Awakeners capable of this within the Duke of Diarca's circle, then these are the ones I find exceedingly suspicious. Those identified were the Awakener healers treating the Crown Prince. Their true identities were the dangerous Awakener that the cavalry and Paleta Knights were currently tracking. Originating from the Star of Nagran, where the sage they followed also seemed to be present. The Emperor nodded slowly after hearing Kishir's explanation. Indeed, we should investigate them as well. They have been residing in the Bright Palace since the day before the intrusion, a rather interesting coincidence. I'm not interested in coincidences. Nevertheless, it will make it easier to investigate using this power. Wouldn't they make excellent practice targets? For now, I plan to feign being indisposed to observe those around me. Make sure you sync up your actions accordingly. Leave it to me. A flawless smile spread across Kishir's face. However, as the Emperor stared at him, he slightly furrowed his brows and tilted his head. By the way, Kishir. Yes, Your Majesty? Have you had trouble sleeping since that day? The sudden question was so sharp that even Kishir couldn't help but show a momentary lapse. The leisurely smile on Kishir Laor's face briefly faltered before returning to its original state. Why do you ask such a question? Don't pretend you don't know. I might not be able to read other people's eyes, but it's hard to deceive me. If you're not feeling well, say so. Only then did Kishir's expression change slightly. He erased the hopeful look he had been wearing while discussing the upcoming events. What emerged instead was a subtle and slightly wary gaze, as if even he himself didn't know what to say. No, that's not the issue. Then what is it? I had a rather strange dream. A dream? The Emperor asked, his expression slightly puzzled, as this was the first time he had heard his brother cite such a reason. A penetrating gaze scanned Kishir's face, trying to determine if he was telling the truth or lying. Yes, a dream. To be frank, it was more like a nightmare. That's probably why I seemed a bit fatigued. Kishir smiled as he rubbed his forehead.